Hi class, this is Marshall Sponder, your lecturer for Marketing 4123 and 9738, or vice versa, Web Analytics and Intelligence. And this is our second presentation. Okay, so last week, or last session, or last presentation, we discussed the key business requirements and the key performance indicators. And briefly said this is the key business requirements tied to a stakeholder usually. In the original terminology of web analytics, that's because most websites were created by business and someone managed the website. And then there was an analyst that did the things. That's why these terminologies came about. But as you see, the way of organizing the analytics began to, the way the organizations functioned created the organization of the tools. So even today, we see these enterprise tools, these web analytics tools kind of mirror the way that organizations function. So there's a cultural aspect to this, so why it was organized this way. And then the key performance indicators are usually tied to the initiative. Like, why am I creating this website? Okay, or why am I doing this thing? Or why am I having this campaign? Okay, well, this is why, and, by the way, I'm going to measure it with, and I'm going to pull some data. Among those things are going to be the web analytics data. And I'm going to pull specific metrics that it produces, or combine the metrics somehow to perform some sort of dashboard or readout, And so we covered this last session. So I always try to overlap a little bit. And so that key business requirement obviously is broad. Like as I said, in my example, I have a book coming out with Gohar Khan that is Digital Analytics for Marketing, and so I have a idea that I'd like to sell more of those books. And that's going to result obviously at some point in online revenues. It may result in more conference appearances even, or it may result in more articles, So I have to decide, exactly what success means for anything. You're not just necessarily, it's not always money that we're looking for. It could be more mentions in social media, too, that result in more prestigious teaching positions or titles. So anyway, I have to decide what is the thing that is the important thing that's going to happen. It's going to tell me something's important's happening. The event, the actual thing, like in the case of what we're seeing here in this chart, it's finishing going through a process of checking out a product or an offer. And then I've got actual metrics on the website, like purchase and checkout initiation rate and buyer conversion rate. So I can actually create little sub-metrics or custom metrics based on a combination of other metrics. Like checkout initiation rate. This is probably something I can put together in the analytics platforms in both Adobe and Google Analytics that can give me those things. Some of the things that I might need as metrics might not be possible to get in web analytics, like CSAT scores, customer satisfaction scores, aren't always like, that's not going to be in web analytics. That has to be defined. But to the extent that you can keep what you're measuring as part of what analytics provides you, you're going to be happier than if you have a lot of things that you're pulling from disparate sources that you can't necessarily easily get a hold of or put together, or things that don't even go together. Now again, every place you work, it's a little different, and usually there's some people in the process. It's never usually just an analyst and the data. It's usually somebody involved, or several people involved in a team, or different teams involved. And so, originally when Web Analytics was created, when Adobe Analytics, the original history being its search engine analytics, and back in actually, the Adobe was Omniture, and that was created in the early 2000s. But these platforms, a lot of them are like 20, 25 years old originally, and when they were created, they were expensive, and they still are to some extent. Adobe is pretty expensive, but Google Analytics is free. So we're living in a different age where a lot of people might just pick it up for their own website, and so this idea of a manager, stakeholder, analyst doesn't really fit. In a lot of startups, it may not fit, but if you go work in any kind of corporate environment, you probably find this is still there. You have a manager that actually, figures out what's needed. They're told what to do, and the manager has to manage it, and then they have to give it to someone to actually get detailed. Like someone specifically who's going to manage a particular property, and then find out whether that property is performing. So that's the manager. But you could see that there's also the stakeholder is someone that's going to manage what they were given and then talk to the analyst. And then the analyst, usually the one on the bottom here, this guy here, or lady, doesn't usually have much visibility except to report on what's happening. But then you also have to figure out how to get the data out of the platform. So the scope becomes smaller and smaller, but also more precise. The analyst has to figure out exactly how they're going to pull this information out. Now, usually, the typical analytic platforms like Adobe Analytics, which we should have access to by now, have these dashboards. They look pretty much like this. These are applets in Adobe Analytics. In Google Analytics, they have other. You could just make a custom. They come with some dashboards. You could just go to a report and add it to the dashboard, and then you can name a dashboard, and it becomes your dashboard. And you can have a number of dashboards, and you can distribute those dashboards. But typically speaking, what you see here is what you'll get out of the box when you just log into Adobe Analytics for the first time, go through, select a reporting suite. You're always going to be the Baruch AAI is where we'll do most of our work, and you can just go look at the dashboard. These are a bunch of reports that are like little applets here, reportlets, and you can look at it. Now with a Google Analytics, it's going to look like this, and you have the same information. It's different websites though. You can't. Our Google Analytics is pointing to a real website called the Google Merchandise Store. It's got real data in it, and Google made that available in the summer of 2016 for anybody. So anybody could actually sign up for that and get those reports and look at the analytics implementation. A really nice step. People have been asking for that for a long time. But Adobe Analytics we do have to pay for. Both these tools at the enterprise level actually do become expensive because there's a paid version of Google Analytics that's $150,000 to $200,000 a year. It has more features, but for most people, the free version is fine. And but one of the things that I think you'll learn in this course is that in order to get anything really useful out of these tools, you have to customize them. That when they first come out of the box, when you first install them, they don't really do much. They give you some raw data, and the data that comes out of analytics in general is usually called an intermediate metric. They're produced by the platforms such as Adobe and Google Analytics, and certainly even the social media platforms. They produce likes, follows, following, and so on. The analytics that come out of platforms in general, the analytics platforms of anything, are usually just the ones that are easy for them to create, and then those are sort of like the building blocks that you need to kind of create your thing, your readout with. So if you don't understand that and you're not comfortable with that, which is I think what we're trying to do here in this course, just get comfortable with that. But you're going to need to do stuff to your analytics if you're going to get that much out of it. Then if you're just going to look at these things as they come, you might as well say they're intermediate. They may be useful for some kind of activity that's going on the website, but they're not really going to tell you anything about how your business is really doing. I mean, and the only exception to that really is when you get involved with publishers that just want, clicks on a page or something like that, or impressions of the page, in search marketing. I mean, those you don't really need much. You just need to see activity. So if activity is all you care about, then maybe these tools and the intermediate metrics they provide are useful. But if you need anything more than that, and most businesses do, they're not. And typically speaking, you'll have a goal, and then such as, and it'll vary based on the business that you're in. Repeat visitors will, is important for marketing. Conversions events would be page views, and so on. As you'll see, I don't want to go over this whole chart. But what we'll find is that most of the tools that we analyze, especially if you buy our book later this year or next, whenever you're listening to this, most of these things that we're measuring are not actually easy to put all together. So in other words, all the different activities that we do in digital marketing, they're generated on different channels and different websites that often create their own metrics. And even if you could get the raw data out, which you can't always get, trying to fashion something that's going to work with everything else that you have just doesn't work. And a lot of times you have third-party data, which we'll examine later. And so when you put all that together, you find out that there's a big fragmentation that we have in digital marketing and in analytics in general, where we have all these different places that are generating data that have different metrics and analytics that aren't easily, and in many cases not possible, to really mix together well. And so when we're rolling up these things, I think what we're looking for is trends and patterns more than exact formulas for return on investment, because in some cases return on investment is not really possible to determine just by these intermediate metrics, and certainly success isn't always. Starbucks, which I think I left a case study in the folder for this section a week. They have a store that opened up in Seattle. That's the first store, and they grew quite a bit. But if they were interested, this was an example from a student some previous semester, but I liked it. What would theirs be? And so they obviously had to brand awareness, records cards, growing mailing lists, and so on. So these different analytics here are these key performance indicators are actually things they can measure on the website. They've got pages for that. They can look at click path. They could use the purchase rate, and so on. And they have to figure which ones would be relevant. And some of these reports are good at the out of the box, like site-wide metrics, page views, visits, visitors. That all comes out of the box. I mean, you get that, without doing anything. But then if you really want to figure out what it means, you've got to create your own revenue, orders, units, shopping. Those have to be defined by an admin. And then you have to go down to specific report level. So that's kind of part of the analyst's job. Cost of goods sold is a custom metric. You might be able to create that in Adobe later on in the semester, or some other custom metric. I think there's an assignment on that. You'll never find that out of the box usually. And also orders completed, same thing. We see that in the Google Analytics implementation of the Adobe, I think, Analytics, of the merchandise store. There's a page, and someone created a goal for that, an admin at Google, so you can see the same thing. And also, you can keep on breaking them down and then looking at very specific reports or that are related to the things you want to look at. This comes actually from an earlier table 4.8. It's before we actually did one of the versions of our book. So don't worry about table 4. Actually, this is in the 5th, I believe, chapter now of your readout of your pack. And also, like I said before, Adobe and Google really do the same thing. And to some extent, the reason I'm presenting both in the course at the same time and giving you assignments that often do on both is I want you to become platform agnostic. I want you not to worry about which platform you're given to use, that you can use any of them, these two or any other ones that you come across that do the same thing. You can learn, they're all pretty much the same once you get to learn them. So just don't worry about having this, you'll learn what you need to learn. Just have the confidence that you can do it. And so there's activities and destinations. Like obviously we know that when we want something, we get to a location, but we know we have to be moving to get there. So we have activity metrics here on the left here. These are things that come out of the box. And then of course another way of thinking of it is destination. These are the things that happen that tell us that we got there. I take the PATH train across to 33rd Street from Jersey City, but I know when I got there, my destination is 33rd Street. I know when I got there when I get there, I might be able to tell I'm moving, but how do I know I got there is when I get off and I could tell I'm at the station. So the events, the milestones, the things that happen, these are things often that we have to create. These are things that the analyst has to create. In Adobe, we have metrics that are set up by administrators. See, every platform has its own way of defining. So, yeah, that's true. Yeah, every platform has its in and outs. But you can see that they all deal with the same thing. So in Adobe, they have things called props that there's a reason why they have that because of the way that was coded originally. They track the activity from page to page of site traffic. In Google Analytics, we don't actually get all that involved in, that. We have variables, custom variables. We have events in Google Analytics. So, there's differences in the way that the terminologies of these things, and the way they were coded and created, system architecture, so to speak. So, if we were going to get into very deeply into how we set up these platforms in an admin course, which we're not going to do here, these things would matter. But just to say, I'm just bringing out that in Adobe Analytics, if you ever going to take this certification exam, you would need to know this. Like EVARs, I used to track the conversion in Adobe Analytics. So these would be more like your goals in Google Analytics. And I give you some standard ones that come out of the box when you do get Adobe Analytics. And I give you a slot of a bunch of them that you can configure. So that's just something to know. And then the conversions, which correspond, I guess, to events or goals in Google Analytics, are the custom events, that you set up. You have to set them up. Again, in Google Analytics, you give this free version, in Adobe Analytics, you do this. Now, these are, it's just an example of how you set up events in Google Analytics, so, in Adobe Analytics. So you have to kind of work with the terminology of each platform. And in Adobe, usually you have to be an admin to do this stuff. You have products, you have to, here's like what a product looks like on a website, and then, this is how people get to it. And you have to kind of, and also, so the Adobe and Google are almost the same, but each of them have their own steps. And so if you're going to use that platform, and you're going to seriously configure it, you'll probably need to go and take an admin course at Adobe, which if you're at that kind of job, you should be given, access to it, even if it's just an online course. So that you can learn the ins and outs of how to set up Adobe and Google. A lot of that stuff is actually available online from Google. As far as which is the best key performance indicators for a website, it's really going to matter. It's going to be a little different. even though in industries they're generally similar, like all travel industries, all airlines probably have very similar metrics, but they do need to be defined. And one of the things we find in general about business, I mean, if we just look back at everything we've done so far in the first week and the second week, it just going back and forward here, it's hard to do this well if the things aren't really set up, so it's premature to set up too many analytics and metrics and key performance indicators before everything's really, locked down to kind of where you need it to be to function before you start putting analytics on it. Because honestly, before then, you're probably going to be changing everything, and anything you do, you're going to end up having to blow up and redo again anyway. And because each platform, as we examined back here, because each platform's a little different, like we had this diagram here, you see all these different places where data is coming in, because it's different. And different metrics come out of them, and different raw data is processed in different ways. When we get back to here, the data itself is going to be tabulated a lot of times on the platform itself with its own data collection, its own measures. It may not universally combine these things in a way that's easy to deconstruct to see if it was done right or not done right. There may have been all kinds of bias created by the different platforms. And then when you consider that certain parts of this, let's say social media, follower growth, a lot of these things are a combination of web analytics and social media channels, and again, publishing volume, maybe web analytics, or maybe actually physical publishing volume that are other metrics. So combining these into one formula or a bunch of formulas just generally doesn't work out too well. It never has, and you have to fudge a lot even to get them into some sort of key performance indicator that would be like an overall global thing. And so generally speaking, if people are going to be doing this kind of stuff, they should, customize it for their organization, because we're not at a stage, unfortunately, in our evolution of marketing where we can create something extensible that's going to work for everybody in an industry or every business. That's just not how it is in our current society and our state of living. So we can't really, it would have been nice if you could just have this golden standard that will work for every site, but it just doesn't work that way. And so what each organization considers their success metrics and key performance indicators and so on, even if you can measure these things by taking what they say about their own success and what everybody else, to compare them meaningfully, it's kind of really difficult to meaningfully compare anything to anything else, even though we do it all the time. And again, these measures can't be easily combined. As you see, what we're really coming into this is really omni-channel marketing. This is convergence. We've got all this data coming in, created by different channels. In the digital marketing, is find a way to kind of work with all of them, but you can't really add them all up together. You can put them side by side. Maybe that's the best thing to do in the dashboard and try to see if there's a correlation. But you can't really add them all up. And that's about as much as we can say. In that sense, everything that comes out of these platforms, for the most part, is an intermediate metric, because they're being created by the data that's coming into these platforms, and then you're getting it. And I don't generally... anything that these platforms correlate to doesn't necessarily add up to a successful business. So have some examples. How many of those people like Domino's Pizza placed an order online and went to the store? Doesn't necessarily mean anything, So I think this is enough for one section. Do your assignments, do your discussions, enjoy. Cheers.